This isn't the slander video, but I tell you, it's going to sound like it. What's up, guys? I'm here, and here we can do a breakdown and discussion and analysis of Kashimo Hajime, the god of lightning, breakdown and performance in the Shinjuku Showdown. And this is a continuation of a little mini-series I'm doing. I'm going to try to cover every single semi-major character, like every character that did like something. Like, I guess that would mean I have to do Ino eventually. And he did some stuff. And I want to do Kusakabe. Kusakabe will be fun. But do I have to do LaRue? Oh, I have to do LaRue. Because they did something major, too. Oh, man. I think everyone in the Shinjuku Show is kind of important. But still, we're here to talk about one specific man. One specific fellow. One specific fellow who's been accused to have a certain occupation, as it were. And dare I say, the accusations may be true, may not be true. Once again, this ain't the slander video that's being saved. I have that whole comment prepared. I have a whole funny idea I want to do for that one. But let's not waste any more time, and let's hop right into it. Editing me. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. What's up, guys? That guy with a... I hit the camera. Pencil here. Fun fact, I do into... Have it on me, and keep it on me at all times. And another fun fact, Kashimo Hajime is controversial. I think that's like the fair way to put it. He's controversial and he's complicated. Notably, I'm going to save the more complicated discussion for another video, which is also going to be different from the slander video. Kashimo, despite being a character who is like, if I ever make that narrative tier list, tier list? Oh, sweet mother mercy. If I ever make that like narrative importance tier list, Kashimo will probably end up being like a low C, high D tier character in the grand scheme of the JJK universe. He's also very, very controversial because he has a lot of things that surround him. And of course, the biggest thing that surrounds Kashimo, much more than I'd say his actually much longer and much more general narrative role and his general narrative fight, which lasted 5, 6 chapters. I forget exactly how long Harvard's Kashimo is. But essentially, that most famous fight of his, the thing that overrode it, is the thing I'm dancing around. Yeah. Ryomen Sukuna versus the god of lightning, Hajime Kashimo. Now, this fight is interesting because it sort of opened the floodgates. Where before, Kashimo was definitely accepted to be a very strong character, just generally, even if his, like, feats, quote-unquote, didn't really support it. This fight kind of shattered Kashimo's perspective in the community on a power scaling level. On a narrative level, I think it didn't do too much because Kashimo wasn't discussed too much narratively, considering once again, he's like a low C, high D tier character in terms of narrative importance. But character-wise, this fight is actually really, really good for him. And ultimately, power scaling-wise, like I said, it shattered him. It either sent Kashimo into the depths, into the trash, like this man may actually get diffed by Kusakabe using Simple Domain, or it sent the man to the heavens, and he's number 3 in the verse. There's like that. Those are the two sides. Of course, there are definitely people like me who put Kashimo somewhere more in the middle of this massive, wonderful, amazing, I guess let's call it a landscape that is JJK scaling. But very specifically, the two polarity, that's not how you say that word. That's not how you say that word. The two I almost want to say it again. Polarities of Kashimo are all dictated on this fight in specific. And let's talk about why. Obviously, I'll open up with chapter 236 because it's the introduction to the battle. But the main thing we got to break down is chapter 237 and chapter 238. These are the two chapters that entirely encompass the Kashimo Hajime fight. And there are a couple things to note. First things first. The interesting thing about this fight in particular is how it's positioned for both base Kashimo and NBA Kashimo. We haven't gotten to NBA Kashimo yet, and we won't get to him for a little bit. But remember, base Kashimo in this context is entirely fresh. He has done no fighting today. I want you to remember this. He's done no fighting today. Meanwhile, Ryomen Sukuna has just had, most likely, we don't have enough context for the Heian era to know if he was ever pushed to a similar point like he was against Satoru Gojo, but presumably the hardest battle in his life. The man is literally missing a hand, had to make a binding vow on the fly, which made his ultimate technique one of his ultimate techniques, infinitely worse than it could have been, and is currently in a pretty chill, pretty good mood, and is about to get something that's going to help him get in an even better mood. So, I want you to know all that as a beginning to break it down. So we open up, and we do get to see Kashimo Hajime lunging in towards Ryomen Sukuna. And of course, the battle doesn't actually officially start until Ryomen and Hakari go off to start their battle in the domain that notably never leaves the sky. That's actually an interesting detail to me. Like, I guess it makes sense considering domains do float above the ground, but notably, their domain battle takes place literally in midair and proceeds to sort of replace what Arame was doing while Gojo and Sukuna were fighting, which was literally chilling in midair. But of course, the ice melts, it shatters, it cracks and breaks to reveal Kamutoke as Kashimo Hajime lands. And we see Ryomen Sukuna getting a nice calm little soak in it. And Kashimo is grinning, cheesing, happy and amazed to finally see the glorious king of curses, the man he's been waiting to box with for years. He's like, oh. He's glorious. He's even better when he's soaking wet. Okay, no, he doesn't. But, well, in his head, considering what he's going to go on to say at the start of 238, may not be all too wrong. But he says, the ice was merely a means of delivery. And, of course, we see Sukuna get Kamutoke. Now, this has also kind of caused some, like, weird things for Kashimo's scaling implications, mainly because we just don't know how strong Kamutoke is, but presumably it is quite powerful as it's one of Sukuna's weapons, as we see Sukuna, in response to Kashimo simply appearing, does strike him with a pretty powerful blast. Like, notably, this scale, I forget, someone had calced it. Like, if this was meant to be like cloud to ground lightning and simply not Sukuna's weapon transferring to Kashimo's area based on how the lightning seems to come from the sky, and it is described as lightning, because that's why Kashimo seems to have some sort of resistance to it. It is actually a pretty impressive feat, like, just energy-wise, tanking it, but also, it still is one of Sukuna's weapons. Now, does it compare to Sukuna's own output? That's the big debate that goes on, whether or not this is an impressive feat for Kashimo to take at all, or if it's actually really, really bad, considering, look what happens here. The characteristics of Kashimo's cursed energy provide resistance to electricity. So, this is the thing here. You can see Kashimo does actually take a little bit of damage. His clothes don't, ironically enough, but he himself, you can see the scratches on him, you can see slight burn marks. So he has a resistance to electricity because of the properties of his cursed energy, but like, he still took damage from Kamutoke, which may or may not be embarrassing in a bad way to start the fight, and unfortunately, it only gets a little bit worse from here. As we see, once they have this little discussion, did you become the strongest sorcerer, or were you born that way? And they have this little yada 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 yada. Nobody cares! Because we need to get into the battle itself, where Kashimo Hajime lunges in base, and remember, I want you to remember this. I mentioned it earlier, I'm going to bring it up again. Kashimo is fresh out the Rika oven. As we found out later on that they were sitting in the Rika oven. Fresh out the Rika oven. He was chilling. He was vibing. He was waiting for this fight. Sukuna, heavily fatigued. The man is half blind, by the way. Like, let me pull it up. He is half blind. 2 of his eyes were blown out. And Kashimo lunges in, fully fresh in base, and then gets immediately warded off after swinging the Nioi staff. And Sukuna completely dodges away from him. And then Kashimo immediately gives up in base. Now, you may be wondering, Pencilman, why is that embarrassing? Remember, this Sukuna still has brain damage. This Sukuna's healing has not necessarily stopped, quote unquote, as it's going to show to nearly stop later on, but it's heavily hindered to the point where he has to resort to his other healing tactic. All of that, and Kashimo still immediately went Mythical Beast Amber. Meaning that off this interaction alone, where Kashimo was willing to fight Hakari no matter what, despite how him literally overflowing with infinite amounts of cursed energy, base Kashimo thought that this Sukuna was still enough of a threat to immediately transform. Now, of course, there's the alternate interpretation of this, and that's what you're going to see me doing a lot throughout this breakdown. There's going to be the one interpretation that I initially had, and then, of course, there's going to be the more charitable interpretation. The more charitable interpretation of this is that Kashimo did believe he probably could put up a better fight against this heavily fatigued Sukuna, and this slight dodging and moving away as Kashimo swings his staff is only meant that Kashimo's impatience is showing. Ultimately, he wanted to fight Sukuna, he wanted to use his curse technique for the first time against Sukuna, and thusly, he immediately goes to his technique release, Mythical Beast Amber, simply because he wanted to, not that he actually needed to. That is, it doesn't seem to matter until you remember that technically, for all intents and purposes, this Sukuna should be at full output. The only thing that should be missing is what? It's the weight expansion. So, for Sukuna to be able to fully physically reflect Kashimo's attack and then possibly force Kashimo into transforming immediately, it is kind of embarrassing because this is a heavily fatigued Sukuna in Megami's body. Much physically weaker than, like, any other Sukuna, whether it be Yuji-kuna or True Body Sukuna, because of how the basics of Curse Energy Reinforcement work and how the certain physical bodies have physical stat caps, and they don't, once they get transcended, quote unquote, aka your Makis and Tojis, though they hit a stat cap of their own, and your four-arm Sukunas, because he has a really unique physiology. But for Kashimo to immediately go into this lowest interpretation, he thought his base form wasn't enough against a heavily fatigued, half-blind Sukuna, which is really embarrassing. But of course, there's the other interpretation. For Kashimo's sake, we'll go with the other interpretation, because it's really sad if he really needed to go into NBA for this. But, of course, it still doesn't get much better. Because remember, at the start of the series, Gojo mentioned that Curse Technique is kind of about 80% of your potential. 80%. So, typically, the activation of a Curse Technique could be considered, especially a transformation Curse Technique like Mythical Phantom Beast Amber or Mythical Beast Amber, is considered something of like a 5 times multiplier. If you've locked off 80% of your potential, meaning you're operating at 20%, and you're operating at 100%, 20 divided by 100. 5. So 5 times multiplier. And this Kashimo, he does okay. And that's the main thing, right? It doesn't get really bad until the incarnation. But once again, this is a heavily fatigued, brain damaged, half blind, missing a hand Sukuna in Megami's body. And now, in retrospect, if we go with the common interpretation now, that ultimately, with the death of Maharaga, Sukuna's abilities were cooked. He lost the whole Curse Technique at this point, too. So he was legit just in Megami's body with the remnants of Shrine at this point, because Maharaga getting destroyed ruined his 10 shadows, apparently. Whoops. And now, we see Kashimo lunge in on his initial transformation, and he does two-piece Sukuna. He does give him a calm little left-right. No mix-up, and that's delicious. And we see that Kashimo transforms his mouth to launch out an electromagnetic wave. And this is once again, well, not electromagnetic wave. That's different. But he launches out what appears to be a sound wave. And it blasts at Sukuna. And not only does Sukuna react to it, you can see that he does raise his arms here to block, when before he was simply knocked back and his arms were down. Meaning he reacts to Kashimo's blast either as it's about to be fired or while it's fired, which is not really good, because it shows that like this heavily fatigued Sukuna is already still relative to this partially transformed NBA Kashimo. But on top of that, well, that was loud. That's it. One of his first attacks using his Curse Technique that has been hyped up for how long? How long since this man has been introduced? And the end result is no real damage to Sukuna, mind you. This already heavily damaged Sukuna takes no more damage from this. And the ultimate says, that was loud. Is that a hit? So it's, once again, not looking all too good. This is one of NBA's Kashimo's only new attacks. And we get, obviously, the explanation for Mythical Phantom Beast Amber. Mythical Beast Amber reconstructs the flesh in order to manifest phenomena that Kashimo converts from cursed energy. And we see that he lunges towards Sukuna. But unfortunately, Sukuna, once again, is able to work around him. And now, you can definitely argue one particular thing for this. But then again, it really is, okay, even if you do argue that thing, that doesn't necessarily change the scaling. Notice how Sukuna proceeds to get tagged not once, but twice by the sound wave that Kashimo produces, but not necessarily the blast he produces from his hands. We see it here in the initial transformation after the 1-2 piece. Sukuna does react to it, though, and raises his arm to block, but he gets hit by it. Then Kashimo furthers his transformation a little bit, proceeds to try to blast at Sukuna at point-blank range. Sukuna hits the... Oh, my cheeks about to be spread, and dodges anyway before the beam can even leave Kashimo's hand. Kashimo turns, hop tools all over Sukuna. That may be more literal than I think, but hop tools all over Sukuna, and then Sukuna once again blocks. And I want you to remember, this is stub hand. He is not holding Kamitoke in his hand. So Sukuna not only dodges NBA Kashimo while heavily fatigued, brain damage to Megami's body, but he dodges Kashimo's point-blank electromagnetic wave, and then proceeds to react again to Kashimo spitting at him, blocks it, but then Kashimo lands another physical hit. Meaning, total, Kashimo has landed 1, 2, 3 in this hit, 4, because this we don't really see the impact like we do previously, but it's presumably there considering he raises his hand to block. Though, and this could be argued. I've seen people argue that this is hypothetically a fake out, like Kashimo goes so hop to all over him, but then Sukuna's like, he prepares to block because he knows what's going to happen, only to get schmicks. Like, he's about to get hit with a key blast, but instead he got punched in the mouth. So, that's a more charitable interpretation that Sukuna doesn't just face tank this, but then Kashimo gets his third physical hit. And, obviously, we get more glaze for NBA and why Kashimo is sometimes considered to be number 3 in the verse. Sometimes. But with that being the case, improved agility due to increased activity of electric signals in the brain, sound waves that optimize into two natural frequencies of substances, electromagnetic waves that vaporize irradiated objects. Kashimo's body manifests these phenomena and has passed beyond the human realm. That's another big statement. This sort of like goes into the, hey, maybe he's number 3 in the verse, because, you know, surpass the human realm implies that he's physically stronger than anyone who's human. The only thing is, though, Sukuna is currently trapped to a purely human form. Like, that's the, I hate it, because it's so, like, then again, it appears that Kashimo does not fully complete his transformation until the start of 338, when he gets the third eye, but, like, at least this here implies he should be superior to even heavenly restricted beasts like Maki and Toji in terms of physicals, because if he's truly surpassed the human realm, and Maki and Toji are taken to the limits of what humanity has to offer, shouldn't he be faster? But once again, that's for like a general Kashimo scaling video, not necessarily a breakdown of his battle against Sukuna, so we'll save that for a later date. Because regardless, he does hit Sukuna, he does knock him back, and he does like, he hits him pretty hard here. And this is one solid punch, one solid right hook that sends Sukuna into the ground, and then the bolt pops off. Now, this is also a weird thing for NBA. People wonder whether or not it was truly just 1-2 at the initial start of the transformation, then he mutates a little bit further, and then 3 physical hits in order for him to get the bolt off, which means it would be a lot easier for him in NBA to get the bolt off in comparison to his base state, where it actually does take like upwards of like 5 to 8 hits. Hey, just 2 less hits means a lot, especially when characters in the universe are typically physical fighters, and they would get close to Kashimo, meaning they would be activating the charges naturally. But on top of that, there's also debate on whether or not this hypothetical blast that Sukuna may or may not block, or this initial blast that Kashimo hits him with, also count as placing charges. I don't know. It's all his cursed energy, so by the laws of it, you could argue maybe it's 4 hits required, but it could still be 3. 4 and 3, it's not as big as the difference between 3 and 5. Trust me. My Pokemon players out there know the difference between 3 hits and 5 hits. Yes, I've lost multiple games because my Mamoswine would fail to use Icicle Spear 5 times in a row. But with that being the case, we do get to see that the bolt comes. Now, this is Kashimo's biggest contribution, in my opinion, to the entire Shinjuku Showdown. It is the biggest. It is the big. Well, no, it's the biggest, because another character gets the contribution to take away Kabutoke, who we'll break down in another video. But very specifically, Kashimo's bolt does pop off here. And interestingly enough, it's one of the few bolts that seems to spawn like away from him and like spawns slightly in front of him and then goes towards Sukuna. Now, another big old debate. Did the bolt hit? Unfortunately, I'm not even sure the anime will show this just because of how many explosions are in Kashimo's fight, shockingly enough. But like, if the bolt hit and that is what caused Sukuna to incarnate, then that's a real big thing. Because like, hey, being able to do damage to that Sukuna is crazy. Because remember, even considering the Sukuna is still full output, he just has brain damage and is heavily fatigued, he should still have more than Yuta amounts of cursed energy at this point, or at least around Yuta level amounts of cursed energy, and of course Megumi's physical body when pushed to the reinforcement's limits, because none of the reinforcement or controller Megumi has dropped after the battle with Satoru Gojo. He just has brain damage. For all intents and purposes, this should be a full durability Megana, which should mean that Kashimo's bolts could tear apart Megana, which is very, very impressive. It means that pretty much almost anyone else in the verse would take damage from these bolts. That's one of the biggest contentions about the bolt. Like, hey, how strong is it actually? Does Akari have high reinforcement because of infinite cursed energy? Does he have low reinforcement because he doesn't care about his reinforcement when he's immortal? Who knows? But this could be a great feat if it hits Sukuna. And I think it did. Like, notably, I think it hit Sukuna and then he incarnated. Unfortunately, we don't see what the hit looks like. You may be like, well, why do you think it hit Sukuna if we don't see it? And the main reason I think that is because the bolt had to go somewhere. Alright? It had to go somewhere. And he pops out a little too pristine here for the bolt to hit. Unless you want to say that the bolt hit and then that was as Sukuna was incarnating, so the damage that was done by the bolt was instantly negated by the incarnation as it happened. Regardless, I think the bolt hit. And I don't think full form Sukuna just face tanked it. That's the lowest interpretation I've ever seen of the bolt. That ultimately, while it's powerful enough to tear through Jackpot Akari, true form Sukuna just face tanked it. Because there's no damage on him. I think there's just a reason we don't see it tear Sukuna apart and then he gets healed. But if you want to go real low ball Kashimo, that's it. And this is why I say it's his biggest contribution. Forcing Sukuna to incarnate is actually pretty massive. I'd say it is. Notably, if Kashimo hadn't shown up and made Sukuna incarnate pretty much immediately, I'll be real with you, I don't think the people who show up at the end of 235 would have really forced him to incarnate. Which actually, honestly, he may have actually fumbled the bag a little bit, because if Yuji fought him as Megana a little bit, maybe that would actually help. But ultimately, the incarnation of Sukuna is pretty much the only thing Kashimo gets. Like, Like, it's kind of like the only bit of major credit I can give and a major contribution for him in the Shinjuku Showdown. Now, you could argue, though, as I've seen many people argue when talking about Kashimo's contributions to the Shinjuku Showdown and his performance against Sukuna, it was going to happen regardless. He was very specifically saving this for Jujutsu High and everyone after Satoru Gojo. That's why he fought him in the Mega form, so he could have a full refresh that wasn't just RCT. But regardless, since Kashimo did it, I'm going to give him credit for it. I know some people don't like to do that, but for the sake of Kashimo getting something, especially in this stage of the fight, I will give him the idea that he forced Sukuna to incarnate because the bolt was actually going to kill him if he did not do that. So, congratulations, Kashimo fans. You got him to incarnate. Let's break down the last chapter and why him incarnating may have ruined Kashimo forever. Because we see that while Sukuna has completed his transformation into his original self, Kashimo Hajime has seemingly enough released or reached the final stage of Mythic Phantom Beast Emperor. Because bada bing bada boom, he has a third eye. Now, this does play into his innate inspirations. I'll do another Kashimo video where I break down at least where I think, and from the research I did, all of Kashimo's inspirations. But this is a reference to the Raijin that Kashimo is based on, I do believe, the three-eyed state. But regardless, Kashimo's true narrative purpose is revealed. I mentioned it before and I'll mention it again. Almost every version of Sukuna has a jobber before they get into their real fight. And if Kashimo Hajime can do one thing, golly gee willikers, fellas, it's job. Because we see the first thing he says, or the first thing he thinks, using X-rays to X-ray vision to analyze Ryomen Sukuna, what Kashimo saw was perfection. Oh no, the glazing's already started, and we just begun. But of course, Kashimo Hajime is not deterred, as we get a whole nice little glaze session of Sukuna, but I do want to hop immediately back into the battle, and we see an interesting interaction. Now, this is something I've seen interpreted in a couple different ways, though personally, I will do the more charitable interpretation of it, especially considering this is the one thing I almost hinted at earlier, but I want to save for this mode in particular. Note that even when Sukuna incarnates, he does not allow himself to get hit by the electromagnetic waves. It's the one thing he always avoids. Kashimo lands a bunch of, lands. It's especially generous when talking about this stage of the fight. But he does touch Sukuna a lot, which he probably liked. But ultimately, he, in terms of I mean Sukuna here, never lets the electromagnetic waves hit. He always moves those, which at least in my opinion, now I know some people don't like this once again, but in my opinion, does give credence to this statement made here. Electromagnetic waves that vaporize irradiated objects. I think the main reason that Sukuna takes special care to dodge these is not even because he necessarily knows them, but I think it's Gege showing that these are actually dangerous. Unlike his sound waves, which just resulted in, that was kind of loud. I think these would actually do serious damage to Sukuna as they are electromagnetic waves. They would literally vaporize any irradiated things that they irradiate, and that's why Sukuna dodges them every single time. He dodges the initial one here, and then proceeds to redirect away this one here. Now, this scene right here also does have some interpretations. And notably, when I first did my review of it way back when, I was way less generous, but I think this actually is kind of impressive. Not only does Kashimo lunge in immediately after glazing Sukuna for a little bit, calling him beautiful directly, but he does actually make Sukuna use nearly all of his extra limbs. Look at how Kashimo, one, tried to blast Sukuna, but Sukuna does reflect. He does move the hand away to make sure he doesn't get irradiated. But Kashimo himself blocks, or at least, unless you think this was a flying knee strike, which I personally don't think, just based on how Kashimo's position, it looks like he raised the knee to block the fist. He does block and catch Sukuna's swing here. And he does block Sukuna's other fist with his knee. Now, this is the 50-50. I think this is undeniably a catch of the fist. I've seen people try to say, oh, no, Kashimo, he was just, he wanted to hold Sukuna's hand. And that's or trying to scratch at Sukuna, but come on now. I think legitimately, this was the electromagnetic wave. Maybe he was going to try to fire another one here, but still, he caught Sukuna's fist. This is a full output, fully fresh, fully healed Sukuna, mind you. Remember this. This is full, fresh Sukuna, because the only thing that's remained is the brain damage that was specifically done to his domain pathing. That's the only thing that's left on the Sukuna. This is a fully fresh Sukuna, which once again goes to the idea of Kashimo glazing. He does catch a Sukuna fist here. A fully healed fresh Sukuna. Essentially, think of this Sukuna as the same Sukuna that we'll later see an awakened Yuji not be able to block with all four arms. That's the one thing I'll give. Now, of course, you can argue there's different levels of mentality going into that, and that's why NBA Kashimo versus Yuji is still actually an interesting fight in my opinion, even though I see a lot of people don't. But with Kashimo actually blocking this fist here, and possibly blocking this other fist with his knee, meaning he has way less leverage than Sukuna, and Sukuna's hits were actually blocked. That actually is pretty impressive. We'll go later on to see a bunch of different characters unable to withstand a single one of Sukuna's punches, and Kashimo here blocks 2 of them at the same time from a fully fresh Sukuna. Now, we do get to see that Kashimo not only blocks, but let's put it, he tanks these hits from Sukuna. And as we see, his block holds temporarily, but ultimately Sukuna, seemingly enough, pulls back here and then boom, hits Kashimo with possibly a liver shot and then at least a ribcage shot that sends Kashimo flying back. And notably, Kashimo does take this motion to his advantage to immediately raise his hands and go to fire, this time a dual empowered electromagnetic wave that is much larger than the previous ones he fired. However, it does actually stay much more like Kamehameha or beam based than his previous waves, which does imply that he would struggle to defeat Mahoraga. Like, unless you think this beam could get bigger or like widens out how it's shown to somewhat widen out here, he would struggle against Mahoraga. I'm sorry, I have a Mahoraga video on the brain that I'm working on separately. But like, that aside, we do have this beam here, and he does take this knockback, use it to launch a beam at Sukuna. Now, this is unfortunately one of Kashimo's least impressive feats overall, I would say. Mainly because Sukuna, after the beam is fired, mind you. Now remember, this is, I've seen in some translations, apparently it's not electromagnetic wave, according to some things, but, and obviously this is the whole, is JJK light speed or not? But like, that's cross-verse. We're trying to focus on inverse here for his overall performance. This is just sad. This is presumably Kashimo's fastest nigh sure hit attack next to his lightning bolt, which he does by making contact, which notably never pops off again. Despite Kashimo actually landing or making contact with Sukuna 1, 2, 3 times, you see the bolt does not pop off here, meaning that maybe it does take more times if Kashimo himself is not landing the impacts himself. But ultimately, you see the hands come back. Oh, well actually, what this does feed credence into, because does Kashimo touch Sukuna again? I need to double check. I don't think he does. Yeah, but Sukuna does make contact with him. So actually, this could be good credence into the idea that Kashimo's bolts actually... Oh, wow. I may have just been flat out wrong in that video now that I think about it. Because this happens. Kanji Willikers, fellas, I may have been dumb. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But ultimately, Kashimo takes one of his fastest attacks, or what would seemingly be one of his fastest attacks, him firing electromagnetic wave. Remember, NBA gives him the ability to use all the properties of electricity in the ways he wants them to. So he takes one of his, seemingly enough, more powerful attacks, reels back, hand sparking, launches it, and Sukuna, after the beam is fired, gets off a full 3-stage chant, which admittedly, it's just, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's 6 words. But still, 6 words. Dragon scales, repulsion, paired falling stars. And notably, he warns Kashimo to evade this. And now, the question is, and it's something that'll probably be answered better by the anime than I will admit the manga displays because of how, it's manga. But we don't know, based off this, if after Kashimo hit this, he was stuck in midair, or if he landed and then had to move. Because notably, when we see Kashimo after the World Cutting Dismantle, or full chant dismantle, whichever one you think this is, I think this one can definitely be argued to be a world cutting one, mainly because why would Sukuna need the full chant one? Like, right, why now? He still has full output, presumably? I think, unless I'm mistaken on that, I think this is just full output, fresh body Sukuna. But we see Kashimo does lose part of his hand here. But the interesting thing is, he looks to his right to just look at his hand, but that would mean that he dodged, but I don't know, at least to me, it's hard to tell. It looks like I can't tell which is the upper side of his hand here. I've been thinking about this back and forth. It is meant to be like his palm. It feels weird that that's the hand he loses, and then we'll see later on that he does actually regenerate that hand. That's even weirder. This is either a really high feat or really low feat for Kashimo, because for the longest time I wondered what this was. You see this right here? See this extra detailed hand? Well, fun fact, that's actually the hand that Kashimo loses here. Like, that's his hand. But you can see the issue with this, right? Like, how on earth did he lose that hand to a wall slash? But you can see, once again, it's highlighted here. This is the hand he specifically regenerates. But, like, it's this part of his hand. But he himself isn't bicep. It's weird, right? Like, am I the only one who's confused by this? Because he loses the inside of his hand. and he heals it. He uses his control over his own electrical body and reforms the rest of his hand to go and fire another blast towards the end. Once again, I'm just pointing this out because it's really important for Kashimo's hypothetical speed. And the hypothetical speed of this dismantle, because there's a hot debate, and technically it's still ongoing, on whether or not this dismantle actually traveled, considering you can see that Sukuna, it seems to skip the ground, but then it cleaves the ground right here, and just appears. But still, unless it like appeared right in front of Kashimo, it only appeared in this part of his hand, it didn't hit. If it's like every other dismantle we've seen, aka a flying slash, it moves. This may either be an amazing speed feat, because Kashimo managed to feel his hand getting sliced and still moved out of the way to avoid the rest of it. As Kashimo notes, this is it. This is what took down Satoru Gojo. This is what finished Satoru Gojo. It's a slash that cuts the world. But like, you see? Look at that. How? I still don't know how he does that. I don't know. Like, unless his hand was facing this way, like say he went to, he threw his body, he threw his body to the side. Like I have no idea how he dodged this, like in particular, and lost that intersection of his hand. But he does. That's his blood. That's his hand. He lost it. I don't know. Though it is sad that Sukuna can get a full chant off and slash him before Kashimo can even do anything. Because remember, this is Kashimo at full speed. This is Kashimo at full potential. This is Kashimo at full output. He's completely fresh. Remember this. And he doesn't even really like land any of his special attacks on Sukuna anymore, which is pretty embarrassing. But he does, seemingly enough, somehow dodge this. I still don't know how he did it, though. I'll be completely honest. I don't know how he lost that specific section of his hand to this interaction in particular, especially considering, like, the only way I can see it is literally that, what I mentioned. Like, he threw his body to the side, his hand was out like this, and then it got split off here. Which is still technically an impressive feat if you think that he had to either A, dodge in midair, or B, dodge on the ground and avoid a decent chunk of a full chant dismantle, or, as he theorizes what it is, a world slash. Now, the reason this is impressive in the macro sense of the grand scheme of the Shinjuku Showdown is there's only one other character to dodge a full chant hypothetical world slash. That's Maki Zenin. And while you could argue maybe Kashimo also has perception of dismantles, maybe, because, electromagnetic waves and stuff, I guess, Maki did it through her precognition in combination with her raw reaction speed, which is still really, really good. Her senses are super duper advanced, the best perception in the verse outside of Sukuna and Gojo themselves. And Miguel dodges slashes, but not only are they not full chant, they're definitely not world slashes. So, like, Kashimo's one of two. Of course, he doesn't dodge it entirely, but still, especially considering the angle of how he dodged it, it is actually a pretty impressive feat. And why I can understand why people would take this and actually highball Kashimo with it and be like, hey, like, who else does this? Because notably, Yuta doesn't do it, Yuji doesn't do it, like, no one else dodges dismantles. Except for, like, Yuji, I think Yuta dodges one at, like, the very start of his fight, but he never dodges another dismantle after that. So, impressive? Possibly. Unimpressive? I think it is still kind of just impressive. Even with the evasion warning, like, still, Kashimo had to hear that as the chant was completing. Because remember, Sukuna is using two mouths here for this interaction. He's using his upper mouth to say evade this, and using his lower mouth to speak out the chant itself. So he says evade this and paired falling stars at the exact same time. So by the time either sound would have reached Kashimo's ears, he would have had to mostly be in the process of dodging the dismantle. So, impressive. But with it being the case, actually, let me double check. Oh, no, this is definitely a world cutting slash, because he does the Enma-10 hand sign with his lower hands, and then guides it, all along with the full chant slash. So this is a world cutting slash. This is confirmed by the requirements for the world cutting slash that we see later, or we are given later. But with that being the case, we see that Sukuna decides it's time to embarrass Kashimo and say, oh, you're beyond the limits of the human realm? Guess what? So am I. And we see he strikes Kashimo with Kamutoge. Notably, Kashimo does, I can't tell if I think he gets hit by it here, based on the fact that he does seem to be shadowed here in the outline of the Kamutoge blast, meaning he can't dodge the lightning strikes from Kamutoge, which is, once again, kind of vague, because we just don't know how fast Kamutoge is, but Sukuna appears behind him as Kashimo goes to dodge. But however, I'll give credit, Kashimo does react and go to fire another beam, but unfortunately, Sukuna not only has more limbs, but is seemingly just faster, because while Kashimo does react and turn in time, Sukuna does grab both of his wrists and then give him a double shot to the gut. And that does make Kashimo spit up blood while he's in a more electrical form. And not only that, Sukuna then proceeds to grab Kashimo, slam him on the ground, still holding his upper hands, bounce him a little bit, and then throw him. Now, I've always been confused with this interaction too, because it looks like he grabs him and then throws him without letting him go, but I have no idea how he really did that. But he, like, boom, it's weird because it looks like he flips him upside down here, which I don't get how he did. Maybe like lower punch while holding the wrist, flip, boom, but it doesn't look like that. I don't know. I think Gege just, I'm not gonna say Gege drew it poorly, but this seems a little bit strange. Bounces him off the ground, throws him, and boom, world slashes. Or not world slashes, but at least a net of dismantles. Full power dismantles. And such is the end of Hajime Kashimo. Hajime, how would I say that again? Hajime Kashimo. Now, in the grand scheme of things, if I had to rate his overall performance against Sukuna itself, it's actually pretty bad. It's pretty bad because he never does damage. At least not on-screen damage. The only damage, quote unquote, well, I mean, he does damage, but it's so vague and it's so hard to give credence to. Do you think these little dots here are Sukuna's blood? If you do, he does damage. You know who else did damage to Megana, who was at full output and full defense? Mage. Well, actually, no, that wasn't full output or full defense. His curse energy output was fluctuating. He said his physicals are fine, but there's a whole debate about that. I'm not going to go into it. But regardless, I mean, maybe he draws blood here, but it's kind of hard to tell. Though he does seem to leave some marks. But even that, no, he doesn't. He doesn't even leave marks on Sukuna's cheeks while hitting him in Mythical Fended Beast Amber. His special scream attack, it doesn't do anything to Sukuna. His electromagnetic waves literally never land. Do you think this... Ooh, what in the world? Do you think this is blood from Sukuna? If so, it actually does kind of look like blood, though. I wouldn't blame people for saying this is blood. That's a little bit of damage. Cool, bro. You know who else does a little bit of damage? Almost everybody else, except for like 3 characters. Admittedly, this is still Megana, but still, I don't know. It's hard to really give too much credit to him. And this bolt, well, I personally believe it did damage and forced Sukuna to incarnate. The other half of the community doesn't care. So, like, he does no real major damage. And as many people would say, the incarnation of Sukuna was inevitable. It was going to happen eventually. Maybe he would have done it the instant Yuji and Higuruma landed at the end of 238. Maybe he would have done it when Yuta showed up. Maybe he would have done it when Maki showed up. But regardless, someone was going to make him incarnate anyway. But I still got to give him credit for the incarnation. If I had to rate his overall contribution, ironically, it made things worse. Because if Sukuna didn't incarnate, then he'd be stuck in a much worse body for you, in a much worse body and a closer body for Yuji to pummel with soul punches. But thinking that may just cause Sukuna to incarnate. I'm trying to figure out, the one thing I'm trying to figure out, is Sukuna incarnating against Kashimo a net positive or a net negative? Because that's basically the only thing I can give him. Because I can't, unless you do certain interpretation things and then start comparing later instances, such as this little punch kick clash here later on, I don't know what I can give him. Do I give him like a 3? I'm trying to think. Is there anyone, I mean, there are characters who do worse against Sukuna. And who do less. So I think I gotta give Kashimo a 3. I think I gotta give, it sounds so bad, but I gotta give Kashimo a 3 on performance against Sukuna. While he does force the incarnation, he doesn't do enough major damage or any lasting damage. I gave Maki a relatively poor score because she didn't actually do too much damage to Sukuna. However, in terms of overall contribution to the Shinjuku Showdown, she did remove his arms. She locked off World Slash. She made him manually pump his heart. She did do that. I gave Yuta a whole bunch of credit because not only did he rip out his tongue, also was the facilitation for a bunch of soul dampening punches for Yuji, and also came back. Well, I didn't count Goda in his breakdown. I'm going to do a separate Goda breakdown, but still, I did a whole bunch. I give him a whole bunch of credit for that. Yuji himself, when I do his breakdown video, I'm going to give him a whole bunch of credit, even in his pre-awakening state, just because of how much he ended up nerfing Sukuna with every single mink. And of course, post-awakening, he's just going to get a whole bunch of credit because he beat the guy with help, with a lot of help. But still, for Kashimo, with barely any damage done, you needed to do deep, specific, super hyper-analytic breakdown of his interactions, which can all be argued in different ways. You've heard me flip-flop back and forth. Oh, do you guys think this is him being blocked, or do you think this is him trying to catch attacks and blocking them himself? I don't know. Does this count as tanking, or does this spitting out from him seem like Sukuna does blood damage just by hitting him in the liver? I don't know. Do you think this is an impressive feat that he managed to somehow dodge World Slash in a weird way? Or do you think it's not impressive? I don't know. That's the thing. I'm flip-flopping back and forth on what the feats even mean. And notably, none of them are actual serious damage feats on Sukuna. And if he barely does any damage, and he has no lasting repercussions other than making Sukuna incarnate, which could be a bad thing, I give him a 3. I'll give him a 3 out of 10, which sounds so bad considering how important Kashimo is to the grand scheme of the narrative, relatively speaking, like I said, low C, high B, or high D. But still, it's unfortunate. But it'd be like that when it be like that, especially when it be like that. What do you guys think, though? What would you give Kashimo's performance against Sukuna and his overall contribution to the Shuku Showdown in Let me know that in the comment section down below. And thanks so much for watching. Please remember to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also do have a Patreon down below where you support me for as low as $1 if things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. You'll still now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. So those perks include the live reactions to the series I have to review, free ratings of all my videos, and becoming a $20 patron or a $20 member. You can order whatever video you want. Also I have a link to my Ko-Fi in the description down below. You can drop 5 beans for a short video, 20 beans for a long video, or any beans at all. Any support is always greatly appreciated. Now, I'd like to thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you got. Once again, I love testing you. So if you made it all the way to the end of this video, please do me a favor and leave handyman. I'd say half a handyman, that sounds too complicated. Leave handy, as in like HANDY, man, MAN, in the comment section down below. Now, I'd like to thank you so much for watching. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is That Guy with a Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our sketch tier members: Greyhound, Eternal Flame, Red Wolf 4765, Astro, Super Flame Zero, Brandon Payne, Glacier XE, and G Prosper. And then I'd like to give a big old thank you to our line art tier patrons: Sean, Midnight Lord 21, Kevin, Encarnacion, Igneo Lind, and A+A. And I'd like to give a big old thank you to our Ink tier members: Fine, Austin Wimberly Euchia, and Yuki Alla. Then I'd like to give a big old gargantuan thank you to our digital art tier members: J Warrior and AZ Void. Then I'd like to give a big gargantuan thank you to our colored art tier patrons: Overlord Zero, Joaquin Munoz, and Item Okami. And I'd like to give a final gargantuan, supersized, sweet mother of mercy, that kidney will be yours one day, or the Black Myth video, whichever comes first, possibly both. That Guy with a Pencil tier patron, Calvin Elder.